So, we begin with the sixth and the final in the series of panel discussion on reimaging entrepreneurship in post-COVID era, challenges and opportunities, reboot, reform, research, and topic to be discussed today is the new mantra for startup ecosystem, building sustainable and profitable ventures. On behalf of the IMC Chamber of Commerce and Industry, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all our participants, dignitaries, and our highly esteemed panelists for sparing their valuable time for this interaction with the members. As we begin, may I request Mr. Sanjay Chakrabarti, founder, Million Heads, to present the welcome address. Over to you, Chakrabarti, sir.
Good evening all and a wonderful audience. Welcome. Let's start we start our session with the special thanks to our esteemed panel. Ashish Fafaria, who is from Bloom Ventures, and he will be moderating the today's sessions, and hope you guys will enjoy the entire session with this, which is packed with the power-packed and eminent speakers. There's Ashutosh Ghanekar, who is there from ANG Capital. Mr. Piyush Sharma is there, who is a global CEO and a board member of C-Suite Advisors. Poran Malani is there, who is heading S4 Capital. And he was also there in our previous sessions too. Mr. Rajat Jain, who is the founder of Paddock Ventures. Vishal Chadda, who is a venture partner of Excel. And Mr. Vivek Abraham, who is VP and country co-head of the Invest India set of the Government of India. So you can see the panel here is bringing in a multi-dimensional thinking on the critical issues which post the COVID era. All of us are thinking about how do I, all of this, we are all of us startup founders. We look at it, how do we make our venture to be sustainable with managing all the uncertainties beyond and looking beyond it, and obviously making our venture profitable, because in the long-term sustenance, maybe that is the area where we would all like to go. So in these sessions, I'd now request Ashish to take up from here and put this 90 minutes of time where the audience, who are primarily the startup founders, let them interact, learn, and have a wonderful time and listening to the distinguished personalities here. Thank you, sir. Ashish, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sanjay, and appreciate this. First of all, thank you everyone for joining, and appreciate IMC for organizing this, and thanks for having me over. The thought process behind this whole panel is to discuss the new mantra for startup ecosystem, building sustainable and profitable ventures. Thematically, we have seen we are in the third phase of the startup evolution journey so far as India is concerned. We had the first phase where India came up with creating its very efficient and well-known service economy, with the startups equivalent coming in during the late 90s, creating a very strong orientation for servicing global brands and products based in India. And this has morphed into various forms and fostered technology and innovation in the country, and powered a very high degree of overall customer service and range of offerings for across the world. The second phase was the post Y2K phase, where a bunch of e-commerce businesses, both on the product side as well as service side, began. And we are now in the third phase, which is a more holistic ecosystem with both products and services alike. So India has now offerings which are made in India for the world, where very significant innovations on robotics and other areas are happening, and we are packaging it out for global consumption, global corporates to benefit from, as well as we have our own large market, which has become very efficient thanks to developments on the e-commerce side, whether it is products or whether it is services. Typically, businesses, startups are early businesses which are targeting very high scale and disruption in very limited time. It is a combination of people who are very passionate or very competent on the subject matter, and people who combine forces with financial investors, stroke VCs. Financial investors, VCs, I would also be unfair to not count in angel investors, who was typically the first investors on the cap table. In the phase of this kind of a radical growth and development, historically, what happens is very high burn, high death rates, which means startups typically, significant numbers would not really go on to succeed or even have life beyond the first about couple of years, sometimes maybe 3-4 years. So due to these high loss ratios for funds or high death rates, what also happens is there is going to be a few that become successful, and those few are going to really make it count when it comes to returns for investors. Those few that becomes large and massive are going to count in disrupting the verticals or businesses they have been part, or industries they have been part of, and even create bigger opportunities for the ecosystem to thrive. While all of this makes it seem like the evolution in India looks very relatively new, however, philosophically, there has been an orientation right from very old days. I'll not belabor the point, but what I'm trying to bring out is there is that approach to high risk, high reward framework when we talk about startups. In that, we are now moving into the current decade. Of course, we have not had the best of starts for what a decade could have been. We definitely could have done much better without the pandemic and result in second order effects on economic conditions. But it is what it is. Most of us are starting to live with the situation. And so it is pertinent to discuss whether the way forward for startups would be sustainable businesses that can grow over a period of time, grow fast, but at the same time be profitable. Is that something which is a possibility? Is that something where we are overthinking? The idea is collectively over the next 60 minutes or so to hear from the experts on the panel, and then towards the end we can have some collective summary as well. And while we do that, the format that all of us agreed when we were talking about how to go about this session was that we will go around the table on views from all the panelists on the subject. And I think people who have questions or feedback people can put them on the chat, and we can then answer them as we see them, right?
Yes, that
Awesome.
can be done.
Awesome, thank you. Let me start by an open-ended question, and we can go around the panel for quick views. So what I would really love for all the panelists, starting with Piyush, if we can, to talk about your thoughts on the topic in the context of the background, and what would you, with your journey, would be really helpful to understand the journey in a little more detail, and connect the topic about profitability, the balance for startups, with a few examples that you have had encountered on the journey. So all yours.
Sure, thank you, Ashish. So in my career, I have had two buckets of my career. In my primary career, I was fortunate to mark out a life of success as CEO of a few large organizations. My immediate last stint was as CEO for Z Entertainment for India and APAC region. And over the last couple of years, I have transitioned from my primary identity into a new phase of achievement, which consists of a few new work dots. The primary one of which is, of course, the startup and technology ecosystem. There is a manifestation of it across some 3 or 4 areas that I work very, very closely with, one of which is academia, the other is the government, the third is multilaterals, and fourth is the overall, of course, the ecosystem. So what I have realized, and when we speak in the context of growth and profitability, is that for an idea to be successful, fundamentally, you're looking at 3 things, right? That first and foremost, there are enough number of people who use it. Second, that they use it often. And third, that they are willing to pay for it. So basically what we are talking about is the factor of any business, any successful startup idea finally needs to have 3 things. There is scalability, there is repeatability, and there is profitability. Now I'm saying profitability is a path to profitability that should be clear. But as far as scalability and repeatability is concerned, very clearly the potential needs to be out there. So I don't think the wisdom is lost out on, is lost out on the funds either. I think all of us sit on the same side of the table, whether it is the entrepreneurs or the funds. And I think everyone needs to look at it as a situation where everyone has a game plan and a timeline, and sit as we do on the same side of the table. We need to appreciate that it is not a zero sum game. It's like a flywheel effect. Different elements provide different kinds of energy, and it's a question of timing. So in the zero stage, or in the startup stages, where repeatability and scalability, I think, are two pivots to search for in the early life cycle stage, and investing in them at that stage is a sure shot prerequisite. Now, mostly I would say startups are dealing with a new concept, or perhaps a idea, or a habit change, and this would therefore require them to be selling on the strength of price, not on strength of brand, not on strength of anything else, and therefore investments required would be disproportionate. So you're not wanting to end up like a mom and pop business. What the modern day, and if you're really wanting to be a startup, everyone is dreaming to become a unicorn, and I guess the name of the game there is to be able to hit the pole position the fastest. Because if you do not hit the pole position the fastest, either you will be acquired or you will just be relegated to the status of a mom and pop business. So when is the right time? I guess you need to still be failing fast, failing early, failing cheap, etc. And you need to be reaching a stage where you have perfected the product to a certain level. You've got your business model going, you've got the use case done, you've got enough number of users who are using it, are willing to pay for it, and that's the moment, seize the moment. And so it's a chicken and egg conundrum, and I think it will vary on a case to case basis. I've seen enough number of cases where that tipping point will come early in the day, and there are cases, the best example is of course White Hat Junior, where it came in something like less than 20 months. And then there are cases where it may take more than 3.5 years also.
Thank you, Piyush. Very important message that you need to make sure that there is a balance between pace, monetization, user acceptance, and get the right amount of scale. And in this whole process, one needs to understand and introspect as to where do I belong. Some businesses may take less than a year, and some may take more than 3 years. It depends on the vertical and the area of business that we are all part of. Thanks, Piyush. I would turn it over to Vishal. Hi, Vishal. Would be useful to put it from your perspective and journey, the whole argument about the aspects of profitability and the whole logic and argument of balancing scale growth with unit economics. So would be really interesting to have your thoughts around it with examples of a few case studies over the illustrious journey of yours.
Sure, Ashish. Thank you so much. In my view, this has always been a big debate about, what stage should profitability become the primary metric of a startup versus, say, scale, etc. And I think the noise is only getting bigger on this as the startup ecosystem is maturing and investors are seeking exits, etc. And clearly, it's getting amplified with what the world is going through right now in terms of the economic crisis and the resulting liquidity crunch. My take on this, Ashish, is that there's really no right or wrong here. I think it depends a lot on what hat you're wearing. I think the VC industry, the steer is mostly in a capital flushed world, and we've seen 2-3 of those cycles in the last decade. It's mostly been about scale and market share. Because we all know VC economics are a lot about oversized outcomes in large revenue pool markets. So think Uber, Ola, any of your grocery delivery businesses. It's mostly been that mindset. And fortunately or unfortunately, since VCs are the largest source of growth capital, it does influence the behavior of startups very strongly. But this is cyclical. Post WeWork, post COVID, I think the cycle is changing again. And the buzzwords have now started shifting back to unit economics and profitability. If you're a founder, I feel push for profitability is a choice one makes based on a lot of factors. The industry you are in, whether or not you've hit PMF, product market fit, How competitive is the space that you are in terms of, say other VC funded businesses or competitors? Who's on your cap table and who's sort of influencing your strategy? And then finally, what sort of runway do you have in terms of funds? And maybe most importantly, what are your own ambitions in terms of, the gut wrench that you're willing to go through till you hit profitability? Because that phase is tough. And regardless of the cycle, it does require a lot of courage and mental strength, right? We all know that. And to be honest, I must say this, that it's absolutely okay, I feel, to be small and profitable as well. I mean, there are perfectly sound businesses all around us, which are small, which are supremely profitable, and very, very satisfying to run. So there's no reason why the people in the audience today should not consider that model of entrepreneurship to say that, I can be small and profitable. My personal position, though, as a seed investor advisor, is somewhere in the middle, and I think it's a bit influenced by my own experiences in operating roles in corporate India. So in that sense, I'm fairly P&L focused in my approach with my portfolio companies, even in the early stage companies. But I do pull back consciously in instances where I see that the founder is still sort of searching product market fit, or the industry has an inherent gestation. Let's say it's a two-way marketplace and needs a flywheel to kick in. Or say strategically, there is some sort of market share gain and scale which will lead to profitability. So in those cases, one does pull back. But just to summarize, I think my personal position is really it's horses for courses, Ashish.
Thanks, Vishal. Appreciate, and thanks for actually bringing the aspect of the lifestyle businesses and bringing it very naturally. I was meaning to pick that up at some point in time in this discussion. As funds, some of us, or as investors, some of us do get proposals where the instant reaction is, you seem to be doing pretty well in the normal course of work. Why are you taking on this whole thing about adding external capital at this juncture? And taking external capital always is available as an option. The question is when to do it. Not every business needs money and infusion at early stage. There are enough businesses where if things are going well, if ain't broke, why fix it? Taking on capital from investors and creating additional stakeholders should be more for the right reasons and the right direction, and not because somehow it has become a buzzword over the last decade or decade and a half. Thanks, Vishal. I think a very pertinent point. On that, let me flip it over to Rajat, if I can. It will be pretty useful to have your experiences, and if there have been instances where you felt that there is a business which is strong on lifestyle or strong that path that it can go by raising money, would be really helpful. And also weave it in, would be helpful for audience to understand your views about scalability and the whole conundrum between scale versus profit. So Rajat, over to you.
Thanks, Ashish. Hi, this is Rajat Jain. So in my career of 30 years, I've had the opportunity to be both in corporate roles as well as having jumped out to do a startup, a mobile technology startup 10, 15 years ago, and exited that and got back into a corporate role. So I've seen, a lot of both sides and the pressures of not only building a profitable business, but sustaining profitable businesses. Eventually, I think whether it's a large company or it's a small company or it's a startup, the eventual goal is around value creation. And the traditional way we all understand value creation is profit. And I completely agree with with Vishal on the lifestyle businesses. I mean, there is a great place for small profitable businesses to continue. But over the last maybe 15 years or so, or even 20 years, ever since the whole story around valuations has become important, and the new generation has begun to see businesses being valued for valuation more than profit. And there are enough examples that we can quote where, the businesses have not made even $1 of money, but enough people and enough investors and enough secondary exits here on, from at different points in time have created some return for investors, but the business has not made money. So I think one of the big things that seems to drive businesses is trying to create value, and I would differentiate here between B2B businesses and B2C businesses. Traditionally, B2B businesses have become profitable much faster. They seem to be less risky, and every B2C business demands a huge amount of investment from the company. And I think that obviously means a lot more risk, because you are in the business of customer acquisition, and you're not sure what the lifetime value of the customer will be and how the unit economics will work out. I used to run this company called Mobile to Win, which was one of the very early startups in 2005. Had a bunch of investors like SoftBank and Nexus and Norwest partners from the Silicon Valley. And our whole struggle, even though business had a decent size, was around trying to become profitable. And the debate at the board always was whether we invest more to get more customers or try to, tweak our model to become profitable. And as rightly pointed out, there is no right or wrong here. A lot gets driven by who's on the board, who's taking a decision, or let's say who's driving the decision. Ideally, founders should take a decision. In my case, the company was 70% owned by the investors and I had 30%. I and the team had 30%. So it was a slightly different situation because I didn't start that company. But I think profitability is something that is an absolute essential. I used my last role in the corporate world was Xerox. I think all of us know Xerox quite well. It has been going downhill in the last maybe 10 years, 15 years, lack of innovation, not looking at disruption coming right at it. And it had suffered hugely on profitability in India. And for the last 10 years, the business was just losing money and the only focus there was profit. So depending on what your situation is as a company, startup or otherwise, but in particular startups, I think it is important to always keep the focus on unit economics. Profitability will come, but keeping unit economics in your mind. And I see in my current role as an incubator or as a platform for mentors that very, very few startups even start with that thought. I meet maybe 20 startups a month, and maybe 10% of them are really even looking at a financial number or a financial plan. Forget the profit bit. And I agree these are early stage founders, but I think the point was made about the ambition and the thought process of the founders. And I think that's a very, very significant driver in ensuring sustainability of the business over time. And I think after sustainability, profitability.
Thank you, Rajat. This whole the point that you mentioned about value creation reminds me of a few companies that we worked with, where we have a company in the portfolio that raised all of 2 crores way back in 2011. That's about it. And over the last 9 years, all of their growth has been only through their own revenue accruals and profits. And today, of course, the journey has not been a very radical journey where they would have become a unicorn. And again, a very pertinent point that one must chase the right metric. And the last of the metric that one needs to think about is valuation. Valuation is a derivative and should be left at that. If fundamental factors of the business are going well, if the service to the customers and the offerings to the clients are resulting into cash flows, the resultant output will be valuations and multiples and premiums on thereon. It is not about valuations. It should never be about valuations. It should be about unit economics. And on that note, I thought I'll just switch over to Vivek. Vivek, would be very helpful given you see startups at scale and see them very closely. and from the other side as well. So would be very helpful to weave in your background and learnings and observations. And where do typically early stage founders make or take can learn from others' belly aches? It's the wisest people learn by others' belly aches, and would be very helpful for you to have some learning share with all of us in the group.
No, thanks, Ashish. And before I get into that, I'll just put down a couple of perceptions that I have sitting outside of the startup ecosystem. And just a quick introduction to everybody on the meeting. I'm Vivek Abraham from Invest India. Invest India is the investment promotion agency of the country. And also we run the Startup India initiative. So we have some skin in the game. And like Ashish said, I think we have a few views and perceptions that emanate from the ecosystem outwards. And as an initiative, what we are trying to do is ensure that the ecosystem grows and it touches more and more people outside of the tier 1, tier 2 cities, so that we have a much larger pie that we can all have access to. But having said that, Ashish, I think there were quite a few interesting points that I picked up in the conversations that have happened just now. And one of the things that somebody mentioned just before I did was that we must, or the founders must focus on unit economics, or the founders. I think Rajat, you mentioned that, and we must. And I think there is this, positivity towards profitability versus, a hyperscale growth or something like that. But unfortunately, from a founder's perspective, or from a very basic level entrepreneur's perspective, profitability seems to be one of the lesser priorities. It's immediately, I think, the major thought, at least according to me, and when I talk to my friends and people in the ecosystem, it's all about personal wealth generation. It's all about that. What do I get out of this? And it's always, and that's why you see a lot of Uber for X's kind of models, because if Uber can do this and get this valuation, can't I do this and get that valuation? And therefore this is my cut at the end of the day. And everything then becomes a point of aligning one's incentives towards what your ultimate objective is. Even a traditional VC or a venture capital, I mean, look at the kind of funding they get. They essentially get highly risky capital. They are meant to make those highly risky bets. You can't make long-term, sit in the investment for 10 years kind of bets. You need to have those 10x, 100x kind of growths on each of the bets that you're making, because those kind of bets, the long-term bets, are anyway being taken by your GPs in other funds or other investments. So you are geared to make or attract a certain amount of certain kind of opportunity. And at the same time, I mean, if you look at the way a lot of investors invest in startups, they come in at the MES level, they come in at the pref cap level. Where is the incentive to sit with the entrepreneur and sit there for the long term and enjoy the risk journey? There isn't. The mentality is, I want to make my quick buck. I want to show my 10x growth and get out, and then pass it on to the next big guy. And eventually, it all ends up into SoftBank or somebody like that, who can just buy out everybody with the major valuation. So, there is this mentality that has set into the ecosystem that, I need to just quickly flip my investment over. And I do remember initially getting a call when I just joined Invest India from several VCs, because I was in charge of creating a report on whether government should be actively investing in startups or not through the fund of funds, but should they be actively investing in startups or not? And there were a lot of guys pitching to me saying that, yes, government should be actively taking risk. And I was of the firm opinion that we shouldn't be, because it is not the government's job to take risk. It is a private sector's job. The government's job is to enable private sector to take that risk. And that's where the fund of funds and the credit guarantee fund sort of came up. But the main motivation for a lot of VCs or funds to come and approach me was that, look, I am stuck in this particular investment and I can't get out. And if I can't flip this, I can't invest in other startups. So there was a lot of, so when you look at the brass tacks, it's all about making that valuation cut and getting out of it, which is sort of seeped into the culture of how a lot of investments happen here. I mean, again, no judgment. Like somebody said, there is no right or wrong. It is what it is. Okay. And if you have to play the game, you have to play the game. But at the same time, again, government doesn't see a value judgment, according to me, on whether it should be hyperscale growth or whether it should be profitable. I think we're trying to balance the both of these parameters. And one of the things that we've been doing is actively trying to find out the costs that government itself is imposing upon startups, especially from a compliance burden perspective, and trying to eliminate that and trying to make it simpler for entrepreneurs to get into the game. The other thing that we're doing is the cost of actually increasing your management bandwidth, either your personal bandwidth or finding other people to do that, other things that help you focus on business. That is something that we've been focused on, getting that platform there so that you can talk to people who are more relevant to your business and get yourself into that growth pattern. Another thing that we have noticed, and you know, maybe you can substantiate this a little further in the conversation later, there is actually quite a big dearth of Indian domestic capital in the VC play. It's much better than what it was maybe 5 or 10 years now. And I feel personally, I think that is one of the main reasons why you don't see a lot of long-term bets in the Indian startup ecosystem as compared to the bets that a lot of pension funds sitting in the US or hedge funds sitting in the US would be making in India. I think that also has to do with a lot of the character that we're seeing in the startup ecosystem. So what we are doing is, on our part, educating a lot of corporates, a lot of entrepreneurs to start investing in India. Because when they look at investing in India, they look at it a very different lens. They know that it takes time and it takes 10, 15 years sometimes for a story to get realized. So they're willing to sit in for the long term. The other thing that we can do is sort of promote revenue growth. So, and one of the things that we really early on realized is that we can use the $600 billion of procurement that we do every year as the Indian government to actually drive the growth of the startup ecosystem. So we've been pushing this down to all of our states as well. In fact, I was just watching the state's startup ranking ecosystem, and that has just been announced. And one of the levers in this is how fast do you onboard startups into your procurement game. And so that has also been a great lever. Apart from that, we've been promoting startup challenges and innovation challenges so that corporates who have some problems to solve can use the startup ecosystem to crowdsource their solution. And I think this is the year for us to focus on MSMEs. And, so MSME is very loosely translated, is a super subset of startups for us. So, really rolling out the platform so that, they get more foreign or international technology and partnerships, more funding support. We're looking at even more funds that are coming into this whole ecosystem. So the idea is to really push it and give every input that we can give, making no judgment. But I feel there is this perception that has come outside from the startup ecosystem. Again, no judgment there, whether it is right or wrong. It is just what it is right now.
Thanks, Vivek. I think relevant for me to just spend a minute or two on how typically a VC model works. And in that context, I think it kind of answers multiple questions. That's at least the aim, where one can put in perspective whether I want to go down this path. Is it about joint value creation? Or is it I would do much better on lifestyle? Or is this the whole hype about personal wealth, like Vivek was mentioning? So typically, if it's 100 crore fund as a very early stage fund, they typically would manage to get this money from their investors, or whether it could be corporates, whether it could be fund of funds, or it could be endowments. 100 crores just for the sake of it. The funds are much bigger always, and there are enough number of smaller funds too. And the smaller funds can sometimes be more efficient. So if in a 100 crore fund, if they make about 40 investments as an early stage fund, it is typically 10 investments that need to recover 4 times the overall capital. So what you're talking is a 100 crore fund delivering 400 crores. The high loss ratios, 40 investments start and 10 investments remain. It is these 10 that need to deliver the outcome of 400 crores. And that's really possible when one or two companies really deliver much more than 40. And then there'll be still a few out of that 10 who will deliver less than that. And if a fund cannot really deliver one company with a minimum of 80 to 100 crores single-handedly, fund performance typically does not do as well. So when a startup founder is looking at partnering with a fund at an early stage or an angel, the expectations would be high. And there one can argue that, oh, this is so radical and this is so unreasonable outcome. But then they brace up for the loss ratios as well. Nobody goes after a founder and says, oh, you lost my money. People are willing to take that risk call and have the risk appetite to lose money as well. So on that note, I am going to pull in Ashutosh. Hi, Ashutosh. Would be very useful to connect the dots. We've had the overall approach to value creation, unit economics, profitability. A lot about it has been spoken. With your journey and experience, have you seen that founders or startups where they make fundamental mistakes in that journey, and what otherwise look to be outcome on purpose or bang on purpose and strike for larger scale sometimes just fails to get to that overall target and promise it had when the journey began? And what would your views be on things like scaling up sustainably?
Thank you, Ashish. Just a quick introduction, everyone. My firm, ANG Capital, is a boutique investment bank. We help businesses raise capital and we advise on mergers, acquisitions. So I've worn a sell-side hat for almost all of my working career. So I confess I don't know the pulls and pressures that Ashish faces as a fund manager, where he has promised his investors a certain return or a hurdle rate, etc. But my two bits on capital raising is I'd like to tell any entrepreneur I meet that please reconsider your decision to raise external capital. I've seen broadly that entrepreneurs fall into two buckets. When we meet for the first time and I say, why are we meeting? There is a bunch of people who say we're meeting because I need help to build a world-class business or a service in A, B, C, D space. And there is another set which clearly says we are meeting because I need to raise $2 million. And that itself goes to the mindset of, are they capital oriented or are they business oriented? And as you know, the analogy I always look at is people who are in the poultry industry, they grow two kinds of birds. There are the broilers and the layers. And the broilers are all about just fattening up as soon as possible so that they can be sent to the market for slaughter. And the layers are the ones who give you an egg a day for a long period of time. Now you make the layers almost sound like a bad word, that it's a lifestyle business, and that kind of implies that it's perhaps a bad word or a bad thing to do, which is to run a lifestyle business. But I say, why not? So if you can build a business which is sustainable over a long period of time, which can give you, your stakeholders, steady returns, maybe not phenomenal growth, maybe not eye-watering figures, but a steady, reasonable set of financials over the long term. What's wrong with that? Think about that as an entrepreneur, I would say. Don't look at it only through a fund manager's lens, where the lifespan of a typical fund is in the 6 to 10 year bracket. And whatever needs to happen in year 3, year 4, year 5, where exits need to start coming in. You're at odds with your funder if all you're doing is coddling to that story. So I'll go into more detail when the discussion progresses, but that's really my initial set of thoughts.
No, appreciate. Thanks, Ashutosh. I think it's definitely a valid point, and it's been spoken earlier on the panel as well that one needs to understand that one has options of scaling their business, and there are n number of businesses. In fact, before 15 years, that VC became a way to go. Angel fundraising that became a way to go. We have historically grown as a nation. Of course, there are dynamics that need to be changed, and some disruption is possible only with infusion of external capital. But yeah, like I said earlier, also one needs to raise for the right reasons and the right timing. And one can argue on the other side that there's never the right time. What's the harm when the other side understands the trade-off and the risk return and the fact that they may not be able to realize the end goals? What's the harm in going and raising? One should give yourself a chance to scale. But what companies can scale and what cannot is something that needs to be answered. And even lifestyle businesses we have seen enough cases, haven't we, across the panel and participants, where businesses have done incredibly well, and lifestyle founders can draw home significant revenues and dividends for themselves. So we have one more panelist as well, and Puran, we have not had a chance to talk at all. Would like to draw up to you and have your views on the overall metrics that founders typically do look at in the bid to go down the path of scale, and would be really useful to have your journey in the context of working on the entrepreneurial side and business aspects, and how you see a sustainable balance between scaling and profitability.
Yeah, sure. I mean, thanks for that. I mean, very interesting points and opinions. I think from my perspective, I think the core of the question on the macro scale is, since COVID, what has changed, if anything? And as you mentioned in your opening, the arc of change has always been there. And for India, it was about efficiency, then it's value add. Now it's about getting to the edge of knowledge and beyond. So there's always been change. So where are we, and what's been really made different in the volumes that are out there for startups? And I think I can only talk to what I've experienced, but I've seen a few. And one is, I've noticed that a lot of investors that I work with, they look at entrepreneurs now. And, you know, I think Shailendra just asked a question. I'm surprised to see the word sustainability in there. Shouldn't all business be sustainable? That's one of the questions that's just come up. And it's a very good point. And I think what I'm seeing with a lot of the investors now when they talk to entrepreneurs is, look, what is the point of view? What is the vision that you have? What is the purpose that you have? And then tell me about the spreadsheet. Then tell me about the opportunity. Then tell me about the finances of it. And you're getting this kind of break between good capitalism and bad capitalism. Good capitalism builds things, bad capitalism just copies things. And I've seen so many times, and it was bubbling under before COVID, and it's just accelerated a lot now, where guys, you sit around the table and they'll say, oh God, somebody's just walked in and told me they can do a better TikTok. Oh God, another better Zoom. And before that, people were investing in that kind of thing. Now they're not. They're looking for what the credibility of the founder is, what the expertise of that founder is, and what their traction is and what the potential scale is, not the other way around. So in many ways, what I used to see 7, 8 months ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, was an over-indexing on the Excel sheet. And now what I'm seeing is an over-indexing on the story. And the Excel sheet is almost dead in a lot of these conversations. That's something we can ponder over later. But what is this business about? What is the credibility of this man or woman in front of me? And what the hell are they building? And where's it going to be in 5, 10 years' time? That story, that purpose has to come out. So I've seen that massive shift over the last few months really, really accelerate. And from an entrepreneur's point of view, the other thing I would say is, you know, it's been a numbers game for far too long. And entrepreneurs tend to start off with a lot of passion, start off with a vision. And after a few months of working with the first investor, if they've got it wrong, they end up being a slave to sales Excel sheets. And then 6 months down the line, they're pretty much exhausted because that isn't what they were born to do. They go from entrepreneurship to enterprise far too quickly if they pick the wrong VC, if they pick the wrong investor. And I think from an entrepreneur's point of view, they need to be a little bit more selective. Tell the story correct, spend time on that in order to find the right strategic VC partner. Otherwise, you're going to screw yourself sooner rather than later and go off track and to be concentrated on short-term sales instead of what you're trying to build, which is where the real value is going to come for you as an individual, you as an entrepreneur, and us as investors too. So they're just some of the observations that I would have made that have changed or accelerated over the last couple of months.
Thanks a lot. I think very pertinent. And the other thing also, what we are observing is that choosing your partners, choosing your VC is not all about just the capital. The founder is not the seller of equity, and the VC is not the provider of just financial capital. If it was just trading in capital, then of course all the good money going after bad logic and all that would probably be failing flat on the face. So it is about picking the right partner and what the partners can do. What are the exit goals? One can fit in almost every expectation, which is beyond the time of about 4 to 6 years. If the business is doing well, you can definitely have a follow-on investor buy or prepare around investors. Nobody goes and forces a founder to sell the business just because their timeline and horizons are over. Of course, there are a lot of us who make founders write clauses in documents, but each of the time we have seen across 100 plus investments over the last 10 years, we have had 30, 40 businesses not doing well, and we wind them up. And then there are businesses which have exceeded timelines. And we have simply said, okay, let's go and find a partner together. So I think it is about choosing the right partner. It is about the partners really figuring out ways to help. And there are enough models both in the Valley as well as India. In our own case, when we started the firm, we thought about the platform approach where we try and make sure that the founder is the center of the decision making. So on that note, what I would like to turn over is actually go back to Vivek to work on the government side. What are the government plans to really support businesses and ventures and initiatives like what we're talking about? And it is imperative that the government also has recognized the whole role of risk capital in the development of the country. And they have played a catalytic approach to their fund of funds, where there was a promise to invest a very chunky amount into the country. And a part of it has already been fulfilled. So they have been playing a really massive role into that, leading from the front. And now they're mobilizing sources from other sections of the country as well. So what, Vivek, essentially, what would the plans be to support these ventures? And how's the government thinking about it from a 10, 15, 20-year horizon?
See, from a government perspective, I think the role was always being a good enabler and essentially finding and talking to entrepreneurs, or at least the ones which government can solve, and figure out how to solve for it. I think very early on, we figured out one of the biggest problems that entrepreneurs face. And this is probably a feature of entrepreneurs from remoter cities and villages, that they don't have access to knowledge capital as easily as a tier 1 or tier 2 city entrepreneur may have. To a certain extent, financial capital is still available because you'll still have a bank or some sort of a financial institution that is willing to lend, and in some cases willing to invest as well. But if they don't have complete understanding of what the business is all about or what the business can be, it's literally pouring good money after bad. So one of the major things that we did was to really expand that net of mentorship and guidance. And that has been the primary focus, where we really went to the last village, every district, and ensured that there are a number of champions for the concept of entrepreneurship. In fact, one of the biggest achievements I feel that the government has done is to really lower the psychological barrier for an entrepreneur to enter into the entrepreneurial world. Because, and I'll give you a statistic, and I'm sure all of you can relate to this on the call. When I graduated from B school almost 15 years ago, half of my class either went to the banking profession, other half went to consulting. And today, the same school, a much bigger class, obviously, but half of them are either starting up their own business, or they're looking to join a very early stage, very risky business. Probably not true of this particular class because of COVID, but till 2019, that was very clearly the case. And these are not people who don't need the money and who don't need the salary, or who are not after generating wealth or not, but it's their complete motivation for doing stuff in life has changed. That has really unlocked some good talent and some good minds to come into this space. The other thing that we are very actively doing is having a very, very live conversation with people like you, venture capitalists, larger startups, and people who are really are involved in the startup ecosystem, to understand the nitty-gritties of each and every regulation and policy that affects a startup or a venture capital firm, and really hack at it, and ensure that we have a very conducive policy or a conducive environment for a startup in the country. Um, I think the third thing that we are doing is really going out there, like I said, promoting these startups as a supplier concept, and we're finding more and more ways of doing it. So one of the first things that we did is create this whole procurement system called the government e-marketplace, and really starting startups onto the system. The other thing that we did was we lowered the barrier to entry for a lot of startups to participate in government tenders. So whereas if you earlier, if you had to participate in a government tender, you needed to have that experience, you need to put in a earnest money deposit, which was quite prohibitive sometimes, show that experience that you have. But all of that has been eliminated. And if you're good enough, and if you're able to deliver the outcome, you can get selected, and that sort of builds your credibility and strength for the next round of tenders or bids. So apart from that, I think one thing that we've realized is, um, so like again going back to the original topic, sustainable versus innovation startups. I think we've realized this innovation is essentially not a good business to be, and especially in the first few years.
I,
I
we are
think,
lost Vivek.
yeah, we have lost Vivek, I suppose.
No, we'll wait for he can come back and we can go back to him. While he comes back, Vishal, I would like to turn it over to you. Vivek mentioned about some of the problems that they help with. Okay, Vivek, would you like to finish? Sorry, you're back.
Thanks, Ashish. So sorry, I don't know what happened. Suddenly,
No worries. You can go ahead and conclude what you were saying.
Yes. So, so one of the things that we realized was innovation versus scalability is a very different ballgame. So we're actually going out there and plucking out innovators and giving them a platform where, if they want to continue working on the innovation, they can do that sustainably with a corporate partner or a financial investor who is able to fund that particular innovation, or they get released from that burden of really managing and promoting that innovation, and they can sell it off to somebody else. So the idea is to keep the innovator in the game, and ensure that he gets monetarily compensated for everything that he has done or she has done. And essentially, those are the four areas that we have primarily focused on during this last few years. I don't see that changing. But again, I'm here to learn, and I'm here for the ideas. So if there is anything, happy to take it back.
Thanks a lot. Vishal, wanted to just check with you and have you share the common levers that founders could look at from a profitability standpoint. We have, as an ecosystem, not had outcomes which have scaled massively in terms of profitability, and therefore we don't have the numbers to go down the path of taking our companies public. There have been a few, and we have been a land of entrepreneurs, so it's a bit of a tragedy that we have not seen that already. But at the same time, it's not hard to understand that we are now maturing as a system, and we're reaching that phase where over the next 2-3 years, I'm hoping that there would be half a dozen cases that go down the path of public IPOs, I mean. So would love to understand some of the levers that typically startups can push towards profitability and scaling and make themselves self-reliant in the context of economic. Atmanirbhar is the word. So how do we go about doing that and not be at the mercy of VCs for their own sustenance?
Yeah, sure, Ashish. It's a good point. Look, when cycles turn and liquidity is a crunch, I mean, founders do need to sort of reassess their strategies, recalibrate, and there are tools in the box. And some of these, honestly, might sound very simple, cliched as ideas, but you'll be surprised. A lot of founders miss them out. And before I talk about levers, I think the caveat would be a lot of this depends on, again, what industry are you in, what is the stage of your company, and some could be purely short-term measures, some would be more long-term. But idea is that if liquidity is crunched, then how do you sort of tide through that? My first and the most favorite one, Ashish, would be go back to basics. I mean, you should always be trying to build a fundamentally strong business regardless of the cycle. And I think somebody said that correctly, that has to be the focus in terms of what are you building, and fundraising can't really be the focus. So, I mean, what does it mean for a founder in terms of actuals? So, for example, unit economics is part of your focus and you're a consumer business, then how do you start driving some of the metrics that mean health of the business, something like your CSAT scores, your NPS scores, because these are the things that will help you bring down your cost of customer acquisition, that'll help you ensure that your long-term value from the customer is higher, all of which eventually flows into your P&L. I mean, these are key drivers. Pricing could be another key driver, which oftentimes I see founders sort of miss that out. So, do tinker around with your pricing in the mix to see what's possible, what's not. The second for me, Ashish, would be back to processes and seeing how technology and process can help you optimize some of the things that you're running in your company. Again, an obvious one, but you'll be surprised how many founders sort of miss going back. And sometimes they are so close to the business that it's hard to sort of pull back and see. And the same thing would apply to the third one, which would be more on, go zero base on your P&L lines and really see how you can work with your suppliers, go back to your rentals, look at your marketing acquisition channels and see how much are you paying for customer acquisition, and can you do stuff like marketing, etc., to basically bring down your COGS line, and again push yourself to try and sort of rethink some of those things. And a lot of people who are in your system will be more than open, because everybody is sort of going through that downturn. And the last two for me would be more intangible levers. I think the fourth one would be really about, can you start building a culture in your company, which is, around this common goal that profitability is important as a company. I mean, how can you recast your own salaries? How can you look at stuff like ESOPs to leverage that, to leverage and drive that behavior that you're expecting your teams to sort of demonstrate. And the last one would be seek advice, seek help. You'll be surprised what good advisors can bring to you in terms of ideas, connects, access, knowledge to government schemes, what you have. So structuring a strong bunch of advisors or advisory board around you can help you, because a lot of those people have been through these cycles. So don't be shy of seeking help. I think that will be my last one.
Vishal, the advice that you were referring to, Vishal, by and large, comes there pro bono. There are enough and more of advisors in the country who have phenomenal track records, and they are more than willing to support businesses if they resonate with them. Forget that, they might even become investors and angels in their own small way to support you. So I think it's a very great point. Thanks for bringing it up, Vishal. Rajat, before we get to profitability and sustenance, one can't deny the fact that the first 2 years to 3 years in every single business, and in many businesses even a little longer, would be where they would be burning money, and that is why VCs like us have a job. So in those formative years before you reach that kind of a stage, some startups manage to survive, a few manage to thrive, and the others don't. What are the pitfall? What are the key pointers at which it turns around? Would be useful to illustrate with maybe a couple of experiences, and a small request, unfair to the rest of us. Would request everybody to sum up in a couple of minutes each, so that I can come back to the last question and the takeaway for the participants. Sorry and thanks.
Yeah, so I think a very good question. We're speaking about sustainability and profitability, but there are a lot of entrepreneurs here who are perhaps listening into this. I guess, and this point about starting entrepreneur businesses was also made. I think culture over the last, you mentioned 15 years, Vivek. I think I predate you by 15 years. And in my class of business school or engineering, no more than 5% of people ever thought that they wanted to do something. The story was very simple. Khatam karo, IIT, IIM, whatever it is, go get a job, get settled, shadi karo. This is like the mid 80s. The world has changed now. I think we've seen role models, people doing well. Entrepreneurship is picking up thanks to the government and Startup India and everybody else, including Prime Minister Modi. I think it's really required as far as the country is concerned. So it's important to look at the life cycle of a startup, and in the early stages, and you rightly said, very few companies actually survive beyond the first 3 or 4 years. I mean, there is enough research to suggest that 90% of the companies fail in the early years. So sustainability and profitability ka to sawal nahi hai. And why do companies fail? I think IBM research and some other reports that we see regularly, companies fail because there are hundreds and maybe thousands and tens of thousands of startups who start up onto an idea, start spending time, start spending their opportunity cost without validating an idea. I mean, that idea may not have legs, but because it's your idea, it's close to you, you want to do it. There is no market validation. There is no willingness to pay. There may be no real differentiation or a business model. We see, companies day in and day out, at an incubator in the last 5 years, we may have seen about 800 companies. And I think some of the, toughest feedback, and this is to more than 70% of the companies or founders, would be, really go back and drop the idea or change the idea or get back to a job, because it's a national loss if you were to follow an idea that does not have legs. A lot of people think it is the lack of funding, but our belief is that if you have a good idea and you're able to survive the first 2-3 years, right? And the business makes sense, funding will come. There is enough capital that is going to follow good business ideas, some early traction, and a good team. So I think it's key to survive in the first 3 years, to even go beyond into the sustain phase and maybe into the profitability phase. It's the start phase, which I think is being demonstrated by the change in the country. And there is this 2-3 years of survival, which I think is very critical. And I think the role that you mentioned earlier, advisors and mentors, Vishal, I think that's a huge value add. There are enough people like me, who have quit their jobs in the early 50s or late 40s, wanting to bring that change. And in the pad-up business, there are about 50 such, accomplished CEOs, CXOs, entrepreneurs, academicians, bureaucrats, whatever, who are willing to give back to society pro bono, just do it for the good, because knowledge is one thing. If you share, it grows. And I think the big thing is it also keeps you on your toes. As we grow older, I'm 55, we grow older, it will keep us away from Alzheimer's and dementia.
Thanks, Rajat. So I think the first few years are going to be intensive investment and burn, and then consolidation and get towards for demonstrating positive unit economics followed by profitability. It's this collectively put together, each of these, whether it is the first 3 years, the next 2, 3 years of consolidation and unit economics, and thereafter for profitability. For consumer companies, it may be different. For B2B companies, it will be different. Ashutosh, let me come over to you. Might sound a little old school, but I have always felt that once you achieve that product market fit, and once that initial product development is done, there is never the ideal time to wait and perfect your product. Please go ahead and experiment around with the customer and get him to see what you have built and get him to pay a respectable price which allows you to make profit. In that context, Ashutosh, would love to hear your take in balancing these aspects, or the right time to hit the market with the product, waiting for it to perfectly finish, because there are pros and cons of both. When you go out of the when you go into the market only with the full product done, investors will push back and say, I need to see more traction. When you go in with very early, you might really have a hard time defending the product diligence. The best investors are going to recognize it at the right spot and balance it out. But again, that is when people strike it the right way and do it the right way. Ashutosh, would love to know your views balancing the liquidity, profitability, and the right product market fit timing.
So assuming you created a product which has legs, which a customer is willing to pay for. Now, at what price point they'll pay for it, how much money you'll make selling it. I think these are the areas to really focus on, which is again unit economics. But if you're selling at less than your cost of production in the case of a product, or if your revenues are not enough to justify your fixed costs in a service sort of an environment, then you really need to rethink about why you're in business in the first place. Again, not looking at this through a purely investor lens or wearing an investor hat. Do what is right for your business, for the long-term sustainability and survival of your business. Because decisions which you make today in a hurry to pander to some investment criterion may come back and bite you in the long term. Those could be in various forms. They might undermine the sustainability of your business per se. They might result in erosion of ownership, which will tomorrow be a cause of great regret for you. So raising capital can't be the only lens again through which you approach the market. It has to be about something which is of a higher purpose than that. And in today's scenario especially, I would advise, again, old school perhaps, but I would advise a little bit of a risk off kind of an attitude, which is look at the fundamentals and say that, is there a profit that I'm making at every unit that I sell? And what is the liquidity I'm creating with every unit of sale? Because if your money is stuck in working capital, if it's stuck in debtors and they're taking months to pay you because there's a liquidity crunch in the market per se today, overall in the market, a rupee collected after a year, even if it's a profitable rupee, is no good to you. So today you need to deal with customers who honor contracts, who pay on time, who don't look at you as a kind of a piggy bank where they are leaning on you as the small time vendor who's supplying to them and can be taken advantage of. You need to be careful about some of these aspects of business today. So sustainability comes from realizing a profit, not just having a book profit. That money has to be sitting in your bank account as soon as it possibly can.
Appreciate. Thanks a lot, Ashutosh. Piyush, what would your advice or view be on this whole message of failing fast? There's a lot of advice we founders tend to get from sometimes from the investors and other times from people in the ecosystem that guys fail fast. So if you're not able to get to a certain development, feel free to change. The early part of the business is geared up and every stakeholder will largely be accepting those changes. So what would your advice be on some of these discussions that happen in boardrooms and outside?
So first and foremost, I would say I have the highest regard for entrepreneurs. I think they live the toughest life. We know that statistics shows that as much as 75% of them go on to not make it in the US, and the figure for India is as high as 90%. So hats off to them. I think you could have a great idea, you could have perfect execution, and yet you could fail. You could have great team, you could have great people, you could have great best of mentors and advisors, and yet you could fail. You would need resilience, you would need passion, and yet you would fail. There would be funding at a point in time. You could have all of these going right or wrong, and yet you could just lose out on one single factor, which is something called luck. So I think an entrepreneur's job is something that consumes you, and everything ultimately becomes the entrepreneur's problem, no matter where it starts. So that's also the reason why some of them, want to crack under pressure. And, it's important to kind of constantly gaze upon your own reflection to see all the perspectives. So I would repeat, I think the job consumes you and it should not be looked at. We talked about, campuses being filled up today with 50% of them going the entrepreneurial way. It should not be looked at as a step up, as a fashion. I think it should be looked at as a calling. And especially the times that we live in, I think taming complexity is out and embracing unpredictability is in. So a new worldview is what is the need of the hour for all of these startup leaders. I think some of them may be hearing us, and I would say the emerging world needs a new normal, and that requires to lead from the middle of the circle. So this requires us all to acknowledge the unpredictability as the first step in that leadership awareness. Now, most of all, when we talk about failing fast, I think they need to be flexible. There have been some great discussions. I think flexibility is the key. There is no need to adhere to a set business plan. Business plan is what we were doing in the large organizations that we were running, which had everything stable. Everything, was almost like controllable. I know that uncertainties ruled roost over there also, but yet 90% of the things you had historical patterns, you could have made projections, and let's say a plus minus 3-5% is what would go wrong. In this case, I think the challenge is to find one, the challenge is to find the right business plan. And I'm reminded of what Mike Tyson had to say on the pre-fight strategies of his opponents. And he said, everyone has a plan till they get punched in the face, right? So plans, I think, are a necessary evil. The venture funds need it, we need it, everyone needs a reference point. But for a startup, they are nothing more than a fictional plan. And rarely, as we know, do they ever survive the first contact with the market. So they need to fail fast, they need to fail often, they need to fail cheap, and they need to fail better. So constant experimentation is the key, continuous learning is the key. I think they need to keep their persistence levels high, which is the most important thing. So that will be, net my advice. Do not look for a normal iteration. I think is the key word for every aspect of the business. You need to launch, iterate again. Everything is changeable except the intent, I would say, to give your best. And conventional planning is passé, and dynamic planning, I would say, is kosher.
Thanks a lot, Piyush. I don't think one can ask for more context on planning and failing. I think it is definitely important to make sure that there is a plan, but then no plans are ever going to be sacrosanct beyond the first day that this need to be start implemented. At moment you start implementing, when the rubber meets the road is when we really see actions and all plans going for a toss. On that note, Puran, what you mentioned about the whole dynamics where people typically look at Excel sheets and stretch them out for many, many years, and how things can change radically over just developments which are not beyond your control. And the biggest thing that the founders and entrepreneurs are vulnerable to is uncertainty. And that's where they deserve the most empathy. Any tips on how to brace up with it? I would not put you into a spot by asking how to manage it, but how to brace up with it.
It's a really interesting question, and I work in large enterprise still as well, with S4 Capital, obviously. And you take a look at leadership, and I think it's different in enterprise than it is in entrepreneurship, but there's some of the traits that are the same. I think if you go back 20 years with corporations like Shell or Coca-Cola, we used to measure things based on performance. They were based on predictability. We used to have this thing called a zero sum. So people who made decisions would go up, or when they made bad decisions, they'd go down. And you found after a period of time that people who'd scored zero all the way along suddenly got promoted. And you had this bizarre group of executives who've never actually done anything and never made a decision. So we looked at it again. And if you take a look at the world now, certainly pre-COVID and accelerated again after, you've got to look, somebody just mentioned it. The number one leadership quality is flexibility now. It isn't certainty, it isn't predictability. And it used to be you're going to do this and you expect this to happen and then you will get this. That's gone. They're all gone. They're all gone those days. The other is the most overword used ever, which is collaboration. It's the most misused word. Because collaboration doesn't mean communication. It doesn't mean coordination. It means conflict. It means being uncomfortable. It means being told that you're wrong. It means being told to be able to reevaluate things in order to move forward. So that takes a certain type of leadership as well. And the third part is, you know, I think somebody else mentioned it earlier, particularly as an entrepreneur, reevaluating your own value. Because if you do price something, if you do go out to the market, and if it doesn't work, you've got to take responsibility of that. You've got to then change your plan. You've got to reassess things. And you may have to take, you know, less money out of the system. So I think in one word, you would sum it up in flexibility, but it has a number of pillars underneath it. But I think you can, you know, as an investor, you can see the people that you don't judge companies just on how great things are going to go. You judge things on how badly things may get. And do these people have the mettle to get through it? And I think those character traits have what we're looking for now has changed dramatically to what it was a few years ago. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but that's...
It does. No, honestly, it does, because I never meant in the first place to ask you how should one, you know, fight. One needs to deal with it, and that is exactly what something that I definitely feel people would understand and resonate with. On that note, of course, I definitely would love to have one more round of questions, but we've come to the fag end of the time that we had. I would definitely believe that people have questions to ask us, unless we've answered it all. And of course, if we have questions, happy to answer, or I would leave it over to Sugata and Sanjay to guide us further.
I think the questions were handled during the discussion itself, a few which had come in the chat section. Anyone who would be having questions can just raise their hands and I'll come over to them. Or just put it in the chat section. So I think no. So thank you all for that insightful session. Now, as we come to the end of the session, I would request Mr. Sanjay Chakrabarti, Million Minds, to conclude it by presenting the vote of thanks. Over to you, Mr. Chakrabarti. So please,
I unmute. Hello, everybody. I think we had a very wonderful sessions for the last 1.5 hours. We discussed quite a lot of things, which is very, very relevant, and especially in this time when there's so much uncertainty going around. If you look at the typical entrepreneur, startup founder, they are the one who are facing the biggest of the challenges in terms of the market changing, market forces, their own business and family life, and their personal insecurities, everything put together. In that context, discussing about the entrepreneurship world and the challenges, how to look at it. I think the entire discussion over the last 1.5 hours had brought in a lot of light, a lot of insights, and I'm sure the audience would have got quite a lot of things to chew on. And if they have to, then some of them may have some further questions or something, they can still get back to us or connect directly with the speakers and take the debate and the discussion forward. We are definitely very, very thankful to Ashish, Ashutosh, Piyush, Poran, Rajat, Vishal, and Vivek for these wonderful discussions, and the audience which has enjoyed. IMC, the team IMC, which has been involved in this, right from Shelby to Chitra and the entire team, the Vipulji, who have made this entire journey of this last 6 webinars over this last 1.5 months successful. We are all thankful to them. It is backed by our partners, Invest India, who have given us support, Startup India, who have given us a huge amount of support, and also the Maharashtra State Innovation Society, who have been backing us on this effort. With this note, we would like to thank everyone and say hopefully we'll do one more round of sessions very soon, and we'll again get together. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Ajit
Selby,
Mangrulkar.
if I may say something.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Ajit Mangrulkar, Director General at IMC. Whilst we conclude this very interesting 6-week webinar session, I think each week has been really a great insight for all of us. And a lot of planning and a lot of behind the scenes work has gone in this. I would like to specifically thank Shugata Ghosh, our Deputy Director General, who really did put in a lot in getting these webinars through. And of course, Sanjay Chakrabarti and Vinit Goenka from CKS, who really, put their minds together and had this session one after the other, had some great speakers like all of you on our sessions. Thank you very much, Vivek from Invest India, for really supporting us, and of course MSINS for also lending their support to us. So I thank all of you. You've been a great panel, and we look forward to many such webinars with you. Thank you once again from IMC.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone.
all. Yeah.
Bye-bye. Catch you
Thank you.
later.
So we'll
Thank
again
you.
reconnect very soon. Bye, Swagato. Thanks a lot, Swagato.
Bye-bye. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Huh? Maybe we get a lot of
Thanks,
trouble, but
Yeah.
It was a wonderful session.
Thank you.
Excellent.
with all the ups and downs.
Yeah.
Bye, Rajat.
It's part of the game.
Yeah, part of it.
Thank you, everybody else. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vivek, Ashish, Rajat,
Thanks,
Oran,
Ajay. See you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Piyush,
Bye. I think we'll catch up again.
Ashutosh.